So hi everyone, I'm Anne Høyen. I'm from Denmark and I'm part of the implementation support team at SNOMED International. And so I'm here online today, but Kai is on site in Paris with you guys. And please go ahead and raise questions as we go through the topics that we will cover today. If you have been here before and heard some of the things before, please do just reinforce your learning and yeah, as I said, ask questions if there are things that you are still unsure of. So I'll start with an introduction to SNOMED. It will just be a brief introduction, so telling you about the overall objectives of SNOMED, why we need it, and the principle of using SNOMED to collect your data once and reuse it many times. And then I want to talk about why SNOMED provides meaning to a clinical record and how that can be useful for the subsequent use of your data. And then we're going to take a quick walkthrough of some of the features of SNOMED. So a bit of background. SNOMED is the world's most comprehensive multilingual clinical terminology. So there's actually nothing like SNOMED in comparison. There's many isolated code systems that in combination may provide some of the breadth, but there's nothing in a single product such as SNOMED covering everything. So it is really the most comprehensive clinical terminology in the world. It's not a new thing. SNOMED has many years behind it. And even 2002 was not the beginning of SNOMED. SNOMED was established in the early 1900s or mid 1900s, where in the UK and the US developed code systems for structured capture of pathology data. But in 2002, SNOMED from the UK, which was managed by the College of American Pathologists, and Read Codes in the UK, they merged to form the first release of SNOMED. And in 2007, 9 countries formed an organization called the IHTSDO, International Health Terminology Standards Development Organization. And that's a bit of a mouthful, but this organization was established to acquire SNOMED for the public good. So it's a non-for-profit organization. It's the members of the organization who owns the terminology and steer the direction of SNOMED. But as I said, the IHTSDO is a bit of a mouthful. So in 2017, we adopted the trading name of SNOMED International, a much easier name. So that is our brand name, and we recommend that that's the way you speak about us, SNOMED International. We are now, I say 48 on this slide, but actually that's incorrect. We are 49 members at SNOMED International. We are spread across the globe, have many members, and remember, members is a country, but we actually do have affiliates. Affiliates are the users, and there are also use of SNOMED in maybe more than 80 countries. So even in countries that are not members, there are affiliates with the license to use SNOMED. But this is an overview of the members of SNOMED International, and we are so pleased that France is also a member now. So, as I said, we are a non-for-profit organization. We are established to develop, maintain, and distribute SNOMED. And the vision is that by 2025, clinical terminologies will be used globally, resulting in a better health and improved patient outcomes, supported by one language of health. And this vision is as you can see, close to the ending date in 2025. and we're developing a new strategy, but the essence of the vision is that SNOMED will continue to be the global terminology for health. So this is the underlying foundation for everything we do and work for at SNOMED International. And if we ask ourselves, why do we need a terminology such as SNOMED, and we look at this vision where it says that it's one of the objectives is to result in better health and improve patient outcomes. And you can think about how can a clinical terminology support this? And that's because this really, to achieve better health and improve patient outcomes, you really require high quality clinical data. And what do we mean by high quality clinical data? Well, that we have data that is accurate. So how well it reflects the reality, so what really happened about the patient. So data really needs to be accurate so that we can understand the clinical situation. So the more accurate it is, the more details we have about the clinical situation, the better foundation clinicians have to support the care and treatment required. Consistency is about the way that we capture data, that every time we do it in the same way. And every time we record a systolic blood pressure, it's the same code that we use for it so that it can be retrieved and reused and we are able to count and so forth. Completeness is about whether or not we capture all the information that is required to give a full picture of the situation we want to get a full picture of. So completeness can be difficult, but this really requires a broad terminology if you want to be complete and have all the information that is important. Timeliness is about the availability of data. So in many clinical environments these days, we have isolated systems, and as a clinician, you need to navigate in various systems to actually get access to information that is captured. So that, and maybe sometimes there will be a delay before you can get the information you need. So the timeliness is also a quality aspect. So if you have information readily available when you need it. So these are some of the measures for clinical data quality. There's a range of scientific papers that documents what characterize clinical data quality. But these metrics here are some of the metrics that SNOMED really can contribute to. Okay, so how is it that high quality clinical data can be utilized in a clinical scenario? And how is it SNOMED can contribute to this? And SNOMED seeks to provide a foundation for making clinical data interoperable, meaningful, and actionable. And I want to talk through what we mean about interoperable, meaningful, and actionable. So let's look at the interoperability aspect. So in most countries around the world, information is recorded in multiple organizations about the health and well-being of patients and citizens. It's difficult to grasp how much information is being captured in various systems in the healthcare sector. And this information is captured by various professionals using different approaches and different technologies. So it of course leads to an immense amount of data. But an overall objective for the stakeholders that are recording this information is to be able to deliver the best possible service and continuously make improvements to the treatment and care processes. And a prerequisite for this is that the information is accessible and understandable for both humans and machines. However, the healthcare data that is captured in all of these systems can vary greatly from one organization to the next. So you can consider patients being admitted to different hospitals or different sites within the same country, and they are diagnosed with an intervertebral disc prolapse is the example here. So in each of these systems, patients come in with this back back disease or back injury. And in the systems that are applied by each of these hospitals, this clinical meaning of an intervertebral disc prolapse can be represented in numerous ways. And I want to illustrate just give a few examples. So one system may use a term such as slip disc, another one would use IVDP or intervertebral disc extrusion, and so forth. And aside from using different terms, which are obviously for humans is a different representation, at a database level, you may also use different codes, because normally in every implementation, each of these terms that are used in our value sets or in our options on the user interfaces will be assisted with a identifier. So it can look something like this, that you have different types of identifiers associated with the terms. So this picture here really shows that, well, the systems, they don't speak the same language. You can even argue that they don't have the same alphabet. And that's one of the objectives with SNOMED, is to see if we can bring these things together. But let us look at why is it such a big challenge to have this diverse representation. So this slide illustrates that you can imagine that at one hospital you have had 7 people coming in with an intervertebral disc prolapse this month or past 6 months or something. Another hospital may have had 12 and so forth. So the number there on the slide just indicates that in each of the hospitals we've had some patients coming in with this intervertebral disc prolapse. So they all suffer from the same condition, but they are treated in different places. So if someone comes in and wants to count, so how many people in our country, so if you're doing some national statistics and want to find out how many people in France had an intervertebral disc prolapse over the past year, well, in that case, you can imagine how difficult it would be to get the answer, because the one performing the analysis would need to know exactly what codes to include. So and those contributing the information, so the owners of each of the systems would need to know exactly where to find that information and know what code is the intervertebral disc prolapse. So a simple question can actually be quite overwhelming to answer. And then there's the question, do we know that we have everything? Once we've received and collated our data, do we know that we have everything? Another situation could be a person wanting to then know how many people had some kind of back injury. So if you wanted to, in France, to figure out how many had not only intervertebral disc prolapse, but any kind of back injury, then you would increase the complexity of that analysis, right? Because now we want to not only have the codes and terms for the intervertebral disc prolapse, but anything that is some kind of back injury. So the person here tasked to answer this question would need to include all the codes for all types of back injuries collected in all the hospitals. And another example is when we are referring people from one organization to another, or moving patients from one organization to another. So imagine that this patient up here in the green hospital with an IVDP and a certain code is transferred to the gray hospital down there. So then they receive the code from the source, and the target doesn't know that code. So how will they know what it means? And even the display term may not necessarily be intuitive for those reading that code, because maybe they are using that abbreviation that was used in the source hospital. Maybe that means something else there. So that can really also pose a challenge. You need to then, sometimes you need to do emails with PDFs, and it can be a mixture of approaches that is used to transfer information, when essentially we just want the patient record to be imported and be useful in the same way as all the other patients you have in your system. So the solution to this problem that I've just painted a picture of here is to start to standardize data. And standardization can be done by applying one language, common language for health, so that we actually, instead of having all this variety of different codes, we are using the same codes. And then you can think, well, maybe we also need to take account for the human preferences and the clinical preferences in terms of the terms we use. So it may be that we are applying the same codes, but this code system also needs to take account for the variety of preferences that are for languages. And that's also a principle of SNOMED, that we do support. We are a multilingual terminology, and even within the same language, we also support the ability to add different terms to the same clinical meaning. So the slide you see here really shows the essence of SNOMED, that when we have an identifier that links to a clinical idea, a clinical meaning, and that clinical meaning can then be associated with multiple terms. So that's SNOMED, and that's the background for why we work so hard to get SNOMED widely adopted, because it can really ease some of the challenges with data reuse within the healthcare. It supports the principle of collect data once and use many times, and that speaks to some kind of efficiency, as you'll see here. Because a common language for health should support all the stakeholders in healthcare, in the healthcare sector, because each of these stakeholders that you see here in the picture, they play a very important role in delivering healthcare. Of course, we think about clinicians who have the direct contact with the patients and are primary for a well-functioning healthcare system. But the other roles here play also a vital role in making the whole ecosystem function. So 4 categories of important stakeholders are the clinicians, hospital administration, information analysts, and researchers. But let's start where data is born. Let's start with the clinicians. What is it they need when they record data? They want, of course, to use a clinically focused language. They have gone to medical school. They have taught all these terms and complexities within the clinical domain. So, of course, they want to be able to speak the language that they have been trained to do, so that they can be as specific as required. Also, it's important to have the clinical documentation be fast and easy and accurate, so that they don't miss out of any important details. Also, being able to retrieve the right data at the right time and the right place. So the design of SNOMED has really been shaped for clinicians and also by clinicians, with all of these aspects in mind. When we speak about clinicians, that's of course not, there are many different clinical professions, many different types of clinical stakeholders. So in a typical patient journey through a hospital, there are many clinicians of different types that may record data about the patient. For example, in the emergency room, the laboratory, during the medical treatment, surgery, rehabilitation. And SNOMED is also designed to support the range of clinical professionals that are involved with the patient journey, so that each of them can record the relevant information within their specialty about the patient, so adding the full picture of the current clinical state. Some code systems in the healthcare domain focus on maybe nursing or lab data or other types of clinical specialties, domains, professions. But SNOMED is intended to cover that whole spectrum. When clinicians use SNOMED, they do it through a clinical system, an IT system. SNOMED is designed by clinicians, for clinicians, but also for computers to capture data in the clinical record. When they capture data, they don't see any codes. they just do a search like you and I would do a search on Google to find a good hotel or a good restaurant. In the same way, in a data entry field in a clinical record, you would just do a search using your natural spoken language, and the system will return the matches that match your search string. So in this case, the clinician has searched for pneumonia, and not even having typed everything, they will get the result, and they will select the thing that matches. And what goes on behind the scenes is that just by selecting that one code, you get a range of additional information about that, in this case, diagnosis that you have recorded. You record the concept pneumonia, but with SNOMED CT comes the knowledge that a pneumonia is a type of lung disorder. And a lung disorder is then a type of disease, meaning that pneumonia is a type of disease. It has the finding site of the lung structure, so we define where it's located in the body. And it has an associated morphology of inflammation and consolidation, so we also define, so when we have a pneumonia, what is the morphology that is associated with that diagnosis. We do that for pneumonia, and we do that for all the disorders, clinical findings, procedures, clinical drugs and products that exist in the that are required to capture clinical information. And that results in a huge network of concepts that are connected to each other via semantic relationships. So this picture, when you think about SNOMED, really think about this graph cloud of nodes. So, and that is really what also distinguishes SNOMED CT from many like lists, code lists, and mono hierarchies, where we have a simple hierarchy. SNOMED CT is different from that because it's a network. But this network is super powerful because that's what supports the accurate and consistent recording of information, and also the flexible retrieval and reuse of data. Let us take a look at what the hospital administrators they need. Well, they are of course focused on ensuring that the services are delivered and recorded and reimbursed. They want to minimize data redundancy because they need the clinicians to be effective and not spend all the time on documentation. Also because of the fact that every time you redocument something, you alter the meaning slightly. And of course, one of the principles across hospital administrations is that data should be reused, so collected at the point of care and reused for many purposes. So you can imagine in a clinical setting, information is recorded about the patient history, test investigations, diagnoses, procedures, medications, and that's all recorded with one code system. And SNOMED CT, because even though it is a network, it also has hierarchies. It supports the aggregation of information so that you can actually still aggregate your data and use that to group, for example, for reimbursements, for clinical audits, for quality assurance, and so forth. So although it's a network, it also has the hierarchical structure, and it allows us to aggregate. And that's also useful for information analysts who need to have a standardized way to collect data about diseases and mortality, or perform analysis to provide some insights of the health state of the population, and provide maybe statistical information about the frequency of certain diseases. So let's look at how that could look from an information analyst point of view. Collecting data from multiple sites, maybe reporting them to a data store, a shared data store that uses SNOMED CT. So there will be some kind of interface. So if the SNOMED CT is not used by the hospitals, they would need some kind of mapping into SNOMED CT. Or if they use SNOMED CT directly, they can just report them directly to the research register. And having SNOMED CT there provides a good foundation for doing some selective and explorative data or analysis of data. As you'll see later today, the features of using SNOMED CT for analytics is really powerful. So this is a good foundation. But then many countries also have the requirement to do some statistical analysis, and some code systems are very designed for that purpose. For example, with ICD-10, that's designed for doing statistical classification on mortality and morbidity. So SNOMED-CT comes with a map to the 10th version of ICD. So by applying that map, you can then, from your SNOMED encoded data, apply the map to get the data required to do some statistical analysis using ICD, for example. It could be other classifications too. Let us look at the requirements for researchers. Researchers, and it is comparable to the data analysts because researchers do analysis as well. So often their use case would be that they want to extract the data to identify relevant clinical trial candidates, or to be able to collate and analyze the data that is collected at different sites, but also to be able to selectively query. So not necessarily knowing what it is they want to know, but actually let the data also show the patterns and hopefully be able to identify some potential important patterns that may not have been recognized before, because that's really what can contribute to creating new knowledge and new evidence. So the overall setup of this kind of research environment would look similar to what we saw before, that you contribute your data into a research repository. And you can see here that when we use SNOMED-CT as the common terminology for this, you can collate data about individual patients recorded at different sites. And then you can use features to maybe do some grouping to identify trial candidates, or maybe identify who have had this treatment and who didn't, and what were the outcomes and so forth. So this just highlights some of the features of SNOMED-CT that really supports that, although it's developed by clinicians for clinicians, and it's really also with the intent that data can be collected once and reused many times for all the other important stakeholders of a healthcare sector. I've already talked a bit about how SNOMED-CT adds meaning to a clinical record. I just want to dive a bit more into that. So when you record data in a clinical record and you just use the clinical terms, that's super meaningful for clinicians who really understand all the terms that are spoken. So for example, if a clinician hear the term myocardial infarction, a lot of things is associated with that it's a necrosis of the myocardial muscle, that it involves some tissue death. There are different defining properties of myocardial infarction that is associated with just saying that single word. So that is something that clinicians and the human brains understand. But when it comes to computer, if you just write a term, the computer will just know the term. So the objective for SNOMED is also to make that knowledge that is associated with that term to be explicitly specified, so that computers can make sense of it as well. So all these defining properties, what is a myocardial infarction? What is it? What does it mean? We represent that in SNOMED-CT so that computers can easily process. And we do that via semantic relationships. So when we define a concept, we associate it with other, just as you saw with pneumonia, we had these relationships. So as you can see here, a myocardial infarction is a type of myocardial necrosis and an ischemic heart disease. It has a finding site of myocardium structure and a morphology of infarct. So it has a range of additional attributes. And this all supports effective searching and accurate data capture, and it also helps to interpret what is this concept, what does it mean? So that is what we mean by when SNOMED-CT adds meaning, that we add these concepts to represent what do they mean, and that makes SNOMED-CT a foundation for having actionable clinical data. And having actionable clinical data is data where you have captured your information about a patient, and you can use that data to gain the clinical information you need to do the best possible care and treatment. That data can be reused, as we just saw in all the examples, for research and data analytics, essentially creating and producing new clinical knowledge that can be fed back to clinicians either via textbooks or scientific papers, courses, but also built into the systems as new clinical, sophisticated clinical support systems, which again supports the clinicians, but effectively it pays off for the patients who will have a better outcome and a process. And it also benefits the whole population. We will look at the data analytics feature in a later session. Now I just want to do like a 2 minutes walkthrough of the features. Okay, so yeah, in this final part of the introduction, I'm just going to talk through the features of SNOMED CT. The link you see here is to our SNOMED International SNOMED CT browser. So you can go in there and you can start to explore SNOMED CT. And after this session, I know Kai is going to take you through the features of the browser to familiarize yourself with it. So that browser is really intended to look and explore SNOMED CT. It's not a browser for clinical documentation, but you'll hear more about that. So there are 3 core components of SNOMED CT. And I've already spoken about these. So we have concepts. So these are the clinical meanings. Just as we saw intervertebral disc prolapse, we have myocardial infarction and other procedures, medications, and so forth. So all of them represent all these clinical ideas and things you want to capture are concepts. We also have descriptions, the human readable terms, and we have relationships. So let's start by diving into those 3 components. They are like the core building blocks of SNOMED CT. So each concept represents a unique clinical idea, and we have very many concepts in SNOMED CT. On this slide, it may be outdated because here it says roughly 360,000 concepts. And yesterday, Kai, I believe you said around 500,000 active concepts.
Yeah, no, so it is still accurate.
So it is
the active concepts. I think we're up to 368,000.
Okay,
still good.
So very many clinical concepts, very many clinical ideas that can be represented in and around the clinical record. So 2 examples could be an organism, it could be the disease. So it's just it's not the specific way that we say it, it's the clinical meaning that constitute a concept. And each of these concepts are associated with a unique identifier. And this identifier is intended to be not rememberable. You can't remember them. There's no way that you can remember this type of concept IDs for just around 400,000 concepts. And that's not the intention. These identifiers are just intended to be unique for each concept, persistent over time, and useful for the computers. But we assign each concept with a unique identifier. And then we move on to the description. So that's the concept, that's the core, that's what make the network. If you remember the network I showed you, all the nodes in that network, that is a concept, that's a clinical meaning. And associated with these clinical meanings, we can have descriptions. We can have as many descriptions as required, and each description represents a human readable term that accurately describe that concept. So all the terms that are associated with a concept represent a true synonym. So in order to become a description for a concept, it needs to be a real synonym, not some alteration. It needs to be a synonym. So here you can see 3 descriptions that you would find in the browser when you go and look at that later for myocardial infarction is the term myocardial infarction, cardiac infarction, heart attack. You can find other terms for this concept as well. And if you look in other editions, for example, I'm from Denmark and we have a Danish term for that, myocardial infarct, and that would be the term we would use, and you would have something else in France. And then when you have your French edition with a translation into French, you can then have as many French synonyms as you want. And here you have some examples of that. So for one concept, we have one code, unique code, that can have many descriptions. And what we actually also do is that each of these descriptions, they also have an identifier, so that you can also uniquely record or track each of the descriptions that we have and manage them. So that was the concepts, then the descriptions, and the third component, which is the foundation building block for SNOMED, are the relationships. And here you've already seen some of the relationships for heart attack or myocardial infarction. And you can see that top one here is called ISA. So a heart attack, ISA, ischemic heart disease, and it is a myocardial necrosis. And again, myocardial necrosis and ischemic heart disease is also a type of something else. And that's the way the ISA relationships, so that relationship type here forms the subtype hierarchy of SNOMED-CT. So remember how I said before that it's a network, but it's also a hierarchy. And it's a hierarchy when we traverse the ISA relationships. Then it becomes a hierarchy, and they will all meet up in the root concept of SNOMED-CT. And then we have other types of relationships. So as you see here, for this heart attack, we have finding site, which is a relationship to the body structure, indicating where that concept or that disorder is situated, and the morphology indicating the nature of the morphology for that condition. But these relationships are not called ISA. They are called, in this case, finding site and associated morphology. So these relationships have a certain type, and that type has some semantics built into them. There's an implied semantic in those types of relationships. So for a clinical finding a disorder, you can use a finding site. But if we were looking at a procedure, we would not use a finding site, because a procedure is not a finding. So a procedure can have a procedure site. So we have rules for what are the types of relationships that you can apply and what are the values that you can use as the target. And that is called our concept model. And that ensures that we can accurately represent it and consistently represent meanings of same type. And this is an example of the concept model here. Every relationship has a source and a target. And in the same way, the rules that we specify can have a domain and a range. So when a concept is within a specific domain, so it could be a type of clinical finding, which is also where you find the disorders and signs and symptoms. So that domain in a hierarchy of SNOMED-CT can have a set of relationships that are associated with them. For example, the clinical finding and associated, or finding site, or associated morphology. It could also be a causative agent. There are different types of attributes. And when you see the term attribute, just think of relationship types. So we can have a different relationship types. And for a specific relationship, for example, the finding site, you can't associate that with a procedure. So you can't say that this pneumonia has a finding site of appendectomy, because appendectomy is a procedure. So you need to link the target for your relationship needs to be a body structure when you apply the finding site, because the site is intended to represent the location or the place in the human body where this disorder is persists. So that's why we apply a range to say, well, and this is a syntax we use to specify a range of concepts. So here it's all the anatomical or acquired body structures that can be the target for an finding site relationship. In the same way, we have a body structure hierarchy where all the body structures are represented. And when we have a body structure, some of these can have a laterality, can be defined with a laterality. For example, if we said it was the right or the left ear, so right ear would have a laterality of right. And in order for us to represent that consistently for anything that has a right laterality, we can apply the laterality relationship type or attribute and give it a target that is a subtype of a concept in SNOMED called site. And here you'll find all the different lateralities, left or right or bilateral. So the concept model and the relationships are closely linked together. So the concept model specifies how we can associate concepts to other concepts via these semantic relationships. If you have questions to this, please let us know. This is essential when it comes to when we want to do some sophisticated reuse of SNOMED analytics queries, when we want to, and even just for data capture, want to ensure that everything that we have here have some specific properties, then you can filter your concepts based on these. We have 19 hierarchies in SNOMED, and we've been talking about clinical findings, which is a key one. We've also looked at body structures, procedures, but as you can see here, we also have a hierarchy for organisms, one for, what can we say, pharmaceutical biologic products is where you find clinical drugs. We also have a hierarchy for specimens, staging and scale, substances. So there's actually, the fact that we have 19 is because that's where we've seen that the requirements for the types of information that we need. Also, when we define, for example, when we define a pharmaceutical product, we specify what are the active ingredients. So if it's amoxicillin, we want to say, well, the active ingredient for this tablet is amoxicillin, and amoxicillin is a substance. So in that way, we need hierarchies to also help define other concepts in SNOMED. So some of these hierarchies are very good if you want to just record a diagnosis. You can use all the subtypes of disease. But some of these hierarchies are also useful just to help define other concepts in SNOMED. So we have main hierarchies, of course, products, disorders and procedures and so forth that you would use directly, and others that are more supportive. If you want to add something, Kai, as I go along, just do that, right? And these hierarchies, this breadth of scope in SNOMED is really intended to cover the wide variety of information that is being captured in a clinical record. Signs, symptoms, test results, observations, medical history, social circumstances, and the wide variety you see here illustrated on the slide. And it's not limited to this. This is just an example of some of the common data elements that you will see in a clinical record and information types that you would want to capture. So that was about core components, concepts, descriptions, relationships, the hierarchies. So now let's talk a bit about the quality assurance. So we have SNOMED as the product, and it comes in release packages that can be imported and used, and you hear about that later as well. But actually maintaining, authoring SNOMED is done by us at SNOMED International. We are around 50 staff members that are devoted to making SNOMED a high quality product. We have a team of very experienced terminology authors, some with pure terminology background and others with clinical backgrounds, so that we have this team of experts that are able to acquire the knowledge required to make sure that a concept is authored appropriately, both from a clinical perspective, but also from a terminological perspective. And then we have a very good technical team that is able to create the services and tools that are required to use SNOMED. Because as I've spoken about, it is developed for clinicians, by clinicians, but also for computers. So SNOMED CT is nothing if it's not implemented well and used well in a clinical system. And the design of SNOMED CT, this network and everything, it really requires it to be processed by a machine. So our technical team is devoted to making the services required to make it function well in an IT system and make it manageable also in terms of creating new updates and maintaining SNOMED CT over time. We have associated with that, we have thorough release validation. So that's really a good bridge between the content authors, those who sit and author and models the concepts, and the technical team who provides the software required to do the modeling, but also validating that all the rules that we have, for example, in the concept model, and also rules about how many descriptions, types, that's something I haven't talked about, but different description types and different principles that needs to be supported, that all these validation is rules are complied with before or are run before release, so that we make sure that every time we have a release, it's a robust release and it doesn't mitigate any of our principles and the referential integrity of the terminology. We are also an organization that collaborates with other organizations within this field. So that may be other providers of code systems and classifications, of other health IT standards, such as FHIR. It can be clinical groups and working groups and other expert domains. So we are very, very broad in our span of collaborations. And we have people working on establishing collaborations. Do you want to say something about that since you're on? Okay, no, okay, yeah. And finally, we also produce a range of educational material and implementation support. So people like Kai and I, who are trying to support members in implementing SNOMED CT efficiently, but we also have educational materials so that we have e-learning courses, guidance and specification documents. So that's some of the things that provide, adds to the quality of SNOMED CT. And we release SNOMED CT every month. So there is a new version of SNOMED CT, the international edition, every month. So we are aware and acknowledge that the clinical domain is an evolving domain. For example, when COVID hit, there was a need to rapidly create concepts that could go into the release so that we can be able to document information about the COVID-19 or monkeypox or everything. There can always happen things that require new concepts to be added. Or if there are anomalies in the terminology, frequent releases also supports us in making sure that we make any updates that are required. So every month, and you'll see that in the browser soon, we have a new version. And our members are able to also create new versions of their national editions, but they don't have to follow the same release cycles as we do. They can maybe have a new release of their national edition twice a year or what they prefer. So I think that leads to the end of this introduction. We have covered the why, what, and hows of SNOMED and gone into a bit of the details of its design.
There's a question.
Antoine, vous avez une question?
Yes, we do.
On vous entend, oui.
I wanted to know if there is any link with mesh words used in research papers.
No, there's not as such a direct map between mesh terms and SNOMED CT. It is, of course, I can see why that would be useful in terms of doing lookups in scientific papers and so forth. So it is a good idea, but it's not something that it's not a collaboration that we have had much requirement for. But I could definitely see the benefit of it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that's interesting to talk about research papers, because some people believe that because SNOMED is a licensed standard, because we need like the financial support to maintain it and do all the support. Some people believe that it's not okay to reference SNOMED terms and use SNOMED identifiers in research papers, but actually it is. It's fine to include them in research papers. Obviously, MESH is really well established, and that would be really useful. But if anyone wanted to publish research papers referencing SNOMED and SNOMED concepts, is fine.
I actually think so, and I don't. Maybe we'll talk a bit about that. But one of the things that it could be really useful for is knowledge linkage, right? Where you have some decision support, you want to link to relevant clinical guidelines or new clinical evidence. Yeah, I can certainly see a value for that.
All right.
It's just for
That's maybe a business case for someone.
Because we are teaching Meshword to our students in 2023 now, and I'm thinking about maybe we could begin some courses with SNOMED, but I'm not sure it's a good idea for now. I don't really know.
I think
Well, it's a discussion we should have at another moment, maybe.
Well, I'll just in our chat. I'll actually just send the email to both Kai and I and Alejandro. We are 3 in our team, so that you can send us an email. And
Okay.
what we can do is to go back to we have a team that works with our external collaborations, and we can go back and see if we can track some history, because I'm sure that it must have been discussed before. So we can get some details to you about that. Because I certainly see a use case for this, and I can hear Kai does as well. So it would be interesting to just figure out if there's been any discussions in the past on this.
Okay, thank you.
And Antoine, regarding the SNOMED course, if you want to have a chat with us to, I don't know, make some plan or start to work on something, you can join us too. I will just put the support email from the interoperability, the semantic interoperability team in the chat.
Okay, thank you.